Big Lez's League, an all rugby league experience. Hello, welcome back to Big Lez's League. Welcome back to another episode of A Breaking Bread with my man Isaac. We're going to be tackling some of the NRL news going around in the last week. Isaac, mate, how have you been, brother? What's been happening for you this week?
Yeah, man, it's been a hectic week in footy. Obviously, if State of Origin wasn't already hectic enough, we've gotten all this, transfer news, whether it's Payne Haas, whether it's Lockie Galvin, even a few, role players around the league. It's been hectic and probably the busiest week I've seen in NRL media since the beginning of the season, which is saying a lot. So, tons to get into today. But yeah, it's been a hectic week, man.
Yeah, bro. Yeah, keen to get stuck into some NRL news today. There is a little bit to chat about. Some exciting ones as well, especially one of the players for the Broncos here. I'm keen to sort of touch on as well, just in regards to if you could be landing in a different club. But, mate, get stuck into the first one for me, which
Yep, sure.
is a player from the Bulldogs set to go to the Gold Coast Titans.
Yeah, man. So this one's a little bit under wraps at the moment, and we kind of touched on this in my article for Zero Tackle last week. So if you're keen to get the full read, head over to zerotackle.com.au. But yeah, probably a bit of a shock to Doggies fans. Kurtis Morrin, beloved, middle forward of the club, has been rumoured to be heading over to the Gold Coast Titans. Now, sources close to the situation have told me that Kurtis Morrin toured the Titans facilities last Wednesday with his family and is keen to make the switch over to the club. It's unknown whether it's going to be, before that June 30 deadline or if it's going to be for 2026. But the middle forward is gearing up to make the switch over to Queensland. Now, obviously, this comes, amid a full Bulldogs clean out. We've obviously heard rumours about Reid Marnie heading off, Toby Sexton, who's actually, funnily enough, also been linked to the Titans. But it looks like we may be seeing Kurtis Morrin leave the Dogs and head over to the Titans. And potentially, if it is going to be before the June 30 deadline, we're probably going to hear about it in the next week or two. But again, nothing official at the moment, just a lot of rumours. But sources very close to the situation have confirmed that he has at least toured the facilities.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one. He's a really good player, and he just provides a lot of go forward for the Dogs as well. Just that smaller body that isn't afraid of the contact, ready to get stuck into his work. So he'll be a good player over at the Gold Coast Titans, a side that does play a bit of a faster brand of footy. A little bit of a more mobile forward might do them some justice. They've obviously got Jamin Jolliffe, Mo Fodawaker, Tino. They've got some big forwards there. They've got some really big middles, and it sort of doesn't really suit the attack that they're going for. Guys like Randall and a few other guys over there, they more so suit the attack that they're going for. Klesser Haas, these sort of guys. So bringing in another guy like a Kurtis Morrin, a little bit of a smaller body, you can get a little bit more leg speed, quicker play the balls as well. I think it'd be a good move for the Gold Coast Titans, and I do think it would suit the future of the attack. If the future of the attack is AJ and Jaden Campbell in the halves, and they want to go for that all-out attacking style of footy, then maybe a Kurtis Morrin would be the perfect little grab there for them, where they've already got a pretty big pack at the moment, just to add a bit more mobility there. Himself, Chrissy Randall, getting quick play the balls and being those little, fiery guys off the bench. I think it could do them a lot of justice. So I think it would be a pretty decent move. What about yourself, mate? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, man, absolutely. I think that, and probably the biggest issue with the Titans at the moment is that their forwards and their backs are clashing a little bit. As you said, you've got, such big body forwards over there in Tino, in Mo Fodawaker, and, Campbell Gillard and the like. And bringing in a guy like Kurtis Morrin would essentially bring a spark off the bench, I feel like that they haven't had in recent years. Now, whether a guy like Kurtis Morrin suits the kind of attack that Des Hasler is used to playing, I guess, is yet to be seen. Obviously, there has been whispers about a potential new coach coming in to the Titans, and so whether this is, the ushering in of a new era, I guess it's, yet to be seen. What's interesting here is that, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, Toby Sexton, his teammate and former Titan, is rumoured to be heading over with him to the Gold Coast. So if we're seeing the Titans potentially want to adopt a similar play style to the ladder leading Bulldogs at the moment, it's really interesting because, obviously in recent years we've seen clubs like the Panthers, have a lot of their players poach and have sides, similar like the Bulldogs try to adapt and, adopt that new approach that they're kind of setting in the league. So if we're seeing that potentially, sprout up through the Titans is yet to be seen. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Kurtis Morrin head over to the Titans effective immediately, essentially. And the reason I say that isn't so much because the Titans essentially need him straight away, but because the Bulldogs look to be, eager to shed a lot of the contracts that are currently at the club. There's been talk about Reed Marnie heading over to the Cowboys, and the Cowboys have effectively shut that down for this season. And so that was probably a big blow for the Dogs, who probably want to, remove some of those, higher paid salaries on their cap. So if they can get rid of Kurtis Morrin and Toby Sexton, I think that they will jump to do it. And if I'm the Gold Coast Titans, I'm pouncing on that straight away, and I am bringing Kurtis Morrin into my lineup ASAP. I think he will really suit, the style of footy that Jaden Campbell and AJ Brimson play. I think he will be a spark off the bench that, as I said, the Titans have been missing for a number of years now. And I think he could be a potential, while Kurtis Morrin is, a role player and is no star by any means, at least not yet, he could be a potential driving force behind a change in momentum and attack for the Gold Coast Titans moving forward.
Yeah, bro, it's going to be keen to see, if he does go over there effective immediately too. It would make it a pretty drastic change to the shape of their pack. I think it would obviously allow them to have, as I said before, those more mobile guys there. And from a Dogs perspective, you're exactly right, mate. Just having those, just shutting off a few players in that cap just to get a few more guys in. I think the Dogs still have quite a bit of space. With all the stars that they have, they've signed a lot of guys on under, so they do have quite a bit of space there already. But just to get a little bit more space, and obviously they're backing a few of their young guys as well. I don't mind it at all. It obviously leaves room, especially with the reports around Payne Haas and these sort of guys over the next few years, for them to maybe attract a few more other stars into the building if they haven't got enough star power already. But yeah, look, keen to see what happens here with the Dogs, what they're making room for. Mate, obviously there was a lot of chat before he re-signed with Melbourne that Ryan Pappenhausen was going there. Has there been any more chat around Ryan Pappenhausen and the Dogs, particularly after obviously re-signing with the Melbourne Storm and over the past few weeks?
Honestly, and I was actually, I was having a look into this just a couple of weeks ago, and it's actually crazy. It's been radio silence on the Ryan Pappenhausen the Dogs thing, which is crazy because it was such, I believe it was, towards the end of last year, where there was so much noise around Paps heading to the Dogs potentially. And then I believe he re-signed on that 1-year deal with Melbourne to remain there for that extra season. And so there was talks about him potentially coming after that expiring contract. Now, whether that's going to come to fruition now, I think, remains to be seen based on how the Dogs shape their spine moving forward. Now, obviously, they brought in Lockie Galvin into the club in recent days. And so a lot of fans are speculating how that spine is even going to shape. But if you can slot Ryan Pappenhausen in there, you'd most likely then be chucking a Matt Burton to lock, I would assume, unless you're wanting to put him in the centres. But I don't think that you put one of your spine players back into the centres if I'm, the Dogs coach personally. But if I'm being honest, I think that, by shedding these contracts, like, obviously Toby Sexton, Kurtis Morrin, even someone like Reed Marnie, they're not on a huge wicket. But, you shed a few of these contracts off and suddenly you've got up to $1 million that you can spend on a Ryan Pappenhausen, on a Payne Haas potentially. Obviously, you've got Leo Thompson coming into the club next year as well. So that's taking up another spot in their starting 17. And so there's a lot of moving parts for the Dogs right now. Personally, I've heard nothing on Ryan Pappenhausen to the Dogs. And while many would think that would point to him not heading there, but I'd actually think it's the opposite. I think that there's a lot of rumblings going on under the behind the scenes that could potentially point to Pappenhausen moving over to the Dogs. I believe when his contract expires in 2026, at the end of 2026. But yeah, look, there hasn't been much on that, but with so many players kind of coming off the market, coming off contracts, there's a lot of options for the Dogs to go out and get another big name star. I think that we can see now in the competition that no one is a heavy favourite to win at the moment. Obviously, the Dogs have been on top of the comp for 2 months, but, if you watch their last match or even their last few matches, we definitely know that they're not invincible. And you've got teams like the Storm who are, Mr. Consistent in this competition. So there's absolutely no guaranteed premiership. So if you can bring in these big name players and shed off these smaller contracts, I think you do it.
Yeah, well, look, it's going to be super interesting to see what the Doggies go for here, and it'd be really interesting to see, what happens over the next 2-3 years. I think that we're going to get a lot more noise around Ryan Papenhuyzen going to the Dogs come November 1, or especially leading up to the back end of the season, depending on how Melbourne are going as well. That's going to be a really interesting talking point, in my opinion. All right, mate, let's get stuck into the next one. What have you got for me?
Yeah, an interesting one. Now, I know that, basically every media platform is covering Lockie Galvin and, his entering of Belmore in the last week. But I wanted to revert the attention back to the Tigers for a little bit and touch on a few of the comments that the West Tigers players have made, since his exit from the club. And so 2 players in particular fronted the media last week, which were Terrell May and Adam Dewey. Now, both of them came out and they had some pretty interesting talking points. But first of all, I just wanted to kind of commend both players for essentially coming out and talking to the media where they could have really shied away from the whole controversy and the drama. I know that there's been a lot of tension and awkwardness with this whole Lockie Galvin thing, especially with the Tigers and the playing group. So hats off to both those guys who, came out and they discussed basically what this whole situation means for them and for the Tigers. Now, both players came out and they wished Lockie Galvin the best in his move forward, but essentially were both adamant that if you don't want to be here, it's best for you not to be here. Terrell May in particular gave some pretty interesting insights, revealing that him and Lockie Galvin are actually quite close. Which came as a little bit of a shock to me. Obviously, it could have been very easy to come off a little bit more nonchalant and a bit detached from Galvin. But he came out and said, look, we're actually pretty close and it sucks that he's not around anymore. However, I do wish him the best if this is the decision that he wants to make. While Adam Dewey took a little bit more of a leadership, mentory kind of approach, basically saying that, he wishes that the media would lay off Lockie Galvin and give him a break. He somewhat respects his decision to do what he believes is best for his development. And both players were, had no, ill feelings towards him, but they both kind of were pretty clear on the fact that they want to move on from this situation and they want Galvin to move on from the situation as well. An interesting thing that I thought was probably the driving factor behind why both these guys were a little bit more, kind of easing up on Galvin in this whole drama. Obviously, in the NRL, contracts, whether leaked through the media or published online, they're never fully accurate. But by most accounts, it looks like Lockie Galvin took between $100,000 to $300,000 less to sign at the Bulldogs per season. So I think all the players at the Tigers know that he didn't leave for the money, which is, while it's still a little bit of a slap in the face to Tigers fans, to Benji Marshall and the playing group, I think that the players can somewhat respect that Galvin simply just wants to play for a club that's competing for a premiership, and he believes he can be, the driving factor behind a premiership win for the Bulldogs. So, with reports coming out that Galvin signed between $700 to $750 a year, Parramatta offered him between $800 to $850 a year, and I think we know that Tigers offered well over $1 million. So, for Galvin to sign that lesser contract to stay with the to go to the Dogs, I think that's why the players have kind of told him to ease up a little bit, which contrasts the bullying allegations that came out a little bit earlier in the month. So that's what those two guys had to say about that. And again, like I said, hats off to both of them for handling it with maturity and respect.
Exactly right, mate. I think you said it best there. Just not too much animosity there, not trying to fuel up, storylines in the media and things like that. Wishing him the best. No animosity there. The fact that even Terrell May, came out and said that he was quite close with Lockie Galvin. They had deep discussions prior to him making his decision as well. Like that's so good to hear. That he had a support group, he had people to go talk to in the club, and players that he was close with there. it would have been, a real tough situation, not only for the Tigers players around him, but for Lockie Galvin. Like, this kid's 19 years of age. He's never been in this sort of situation before regarding contract negotiations and things like that. It would have been a bloody tough situation for him, especially with the way it was handled from an Isaac Moses perspective, from the Tigers as well. It was handled quite messily. So for Lockie Galvin to come out the other side, to be with the Bulldogs, to take less money, focus on his development, sure, you can take a ton of respect out of that. But I think you also got to remember that this kid's 19 years of age. He's never been in this situation before. And to come out the way that it has, and to sign with the Dogs on the lesser money, obviously Isaac Moses would have been fighting for the bigger contract, but it shows where his head is in regards to what he wants to do, where he currently sees his career, and what he thinks is going to better his career moving forward. So a ton of respect for Lockie Galvin. I cannot wait to see how he goes at the Doggies. And I think he's going to do very well there, whether it be at 7, whether it be at 6, wherever they have planned for him to be in this side. I think he's going to do some really good things there.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I think that, and you said it perfectly. Like at the end of the day, like he's made a decision based off his career and not his earnings, which. Like we slander players and we smash players all the time for taking big money contracts, for putting their money before accolades, success, and legacy. At the end of the day, while the Tigers are absolutely on the come up, they're not up yet, and it could be a while until they are up. You see sides like the Canberra Raiders, like the Warriors, the Storm, the Sharks. There's so many sides that are just a little further ahead than the Tigers at the moment. And I know we saw, a side like the Bulldogs, obviously, put work into the rebuild and now reaping the benefits tenfold, but that doesn't happen for every club. And while I do believe that the Tigers will be successful again, there's no guarantees that they're going to see such a resurgence that the Bulldogs had or that the Warriors had a couple years ago. So for Lockie Galvin to make this decision to take, $300,000 less a year, potentially even more. It points to a guy who, he not only wants to play for a club that's competing, he wants to have a legendary career. Phil Gould came out a couple years ago, a couple weeks ago, basically saying that he believes that Lockie Galvin could be one of the, highest paid players of all time in the NRL by the end of his career. Which goes to show like the talent that this young guy has. I wanted to pose a question to you because a lot of the heat of this situation has been on Isaac Moses, and maybe rightfully so. He obviously got what he wanted out of the situation with Galvin leaving the Tigers. But I wanted to pose a question. Do you think that potentially, the whole controversy and drama around this situation, some of the responsibility lies on the Tigers as well? Now, we know that the Tigers have been known to handle a lot of situations a little bit unorthodox in the past couple of years, with a lot of information always being leaked to the media. And while I think that a lot of people have taken pity, in a sense, on the Tigers in this whole situation, do you think that some of the onus kind of rests on the Tigers and how they've handled this situation? Or would you say that, the whole messy parts of this has essentially been the fault of Isaac Moses?
I'd say that 90% of it,
Yep.
I'd say 80% of it's Isaac Moses. Look, that's just off the back of things that have come out in the media and what we've heard regarding the situation. It seems as though Isaac Moses has made it a very difficult decision for the Tigers to make, and it's also made it a very difficult decision for Lockie Galvin too. It's been handled quite messily, and I know that he's got a bit of a track record of these sort of contract negotiations, but I do think that the Tigers are a little bit at fault here. And I think the key thing, and I think it was pretty clear to me that Lockie Galvin was leaving the Tigers effective immediately, or, at this sort of stage, when they put the foot down and did not let him negotiate or have the year to sort of assess his options. They just said, look, you know what? At the end of your contract, you're out. You're either going to make the decision now or you're out. And obviously he wanted to wait and make that decision. So, they said that he wasn't going to be renewed going into that 2028 season, I think it was. I think he was off contract at the end of 27. So from that point, I think that the fact that they just gave not much wiggle room, they said, look, this is what we're offering you. It's a big money contract. You take it or you're out, which is fair enough because it is a lot of money and it's a lot of faith that they're putting in Lockie Galvin to be the future of the club, right? So I guess you can understand where the Tigers are coming from in that sense. But, as I said, like he's a 19-year-old kid. He's never been in this situation before. The manager's making it quite messy of a situation as well for Lockie Galvin. A lot of stress would be put on him as well. I think that, at the end of the day, to not give him that wiggle room as a 19-year-old kid just to sit back, enjoy his footy for the year, and then by the end of the season decide, what he wants to do with his future. That was sort of, I think, the nail in the coffin for me where, you sort of look back at that and that was probably the point where you go, you know what, he's probably going to go now. Like, I think Isaac Moses is going to make it very difficult for the Tigers to hold on to him for the remainder of his contract. And I think that Lockie Galvin's probably not going to stay at a club that's, basically put the foot down and said, if you're not going to sign this $1 million contract, you're not a part of our plans post 2027. So you got to remember as well at that point as well, he got dropped from the side. Obviously, another guy came in too, so they really put the foot down in that regard. But yeah, look, I mean, Lockie Galvin, from the way that he's come out in the media and all of the comments that he's made, how he's handled the situation, his maturity, even when he went back to New South Wales Cup as well, and just some of his comments as well, saying that he'll do what needs to be done for the team. Like, it shows a lot of maturity from a 19-year-old kid. And that's funny, like me saying that as only being 1 year older, but it does. It shows that, he, despite this whole situation, he's done the best thing for the club. He's always been club first. Even that first game when he came back and he played extremely well, like he just showed that he was club first the whole time. And while he was at the Tigers, he was going to put his focus into the Tigers. The way that it ended was pretty bad. I would say that maybe 80, 75% of it's Isaac Moses, but there is still a little bit of blame to be had on the Tigers and the way that they've handled the situation and the little wiggle room that they were able to give him as well to assess his options as a young kid that's never been in this situation before.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And as you said, he's 19, and the fact that there was no wiggle room kind of given to him. Now, I know that a lot of and when it all came out, and potentially this is just hindsight speaking, but when it all came out, the media, fans, they all commended the Tigers for putting their foot down, and it's showing new signs of the club moving forward. But if you're pressuring a 19-year-old to sign, what was it, a 5-year contract, and not allowing any wiggle room, it shows that you don't have faith in your club's success moving forward, and that you essentially need to lock in a young star because you're not 100% sure if you're going to be doing well over the next couple years. If his contract was set to expire at the end of next year, it's showing that you don't have faith that you will be able to retain him regardless. So you need to lock him down now. And putting that pressure on a 19-year-old it's very easy for a young kid to kind of freak out and back up. Now, do I think that signing with the Dogs was the right decision? I probably would have, and I said it, a couple months ago, but I probably would have had him going to Parramatta Eels. But regardless, I think that he would have stayed at the Tigers had they given him a little bit more a time to, adjust to not only just being an NRL player, but being an NRL superstar who is being offered these kinds of contracts. Not allowing him to assess his options, especially when you're asking to lock him down for half a decade and he's never been in this position before. I think that they probably pushed a little bit too hard and veered in the other direction. But again, look, I personally think that this situation has played out positively for all parties except for the Parramatta Eels. And I think that, it's probably a good thing that he's out now and that the Tigers can focus on bringing in a Latu Fainu, bringing up a guy like Heath Mason, just building up this club, giving, Jerome Luai more reps to be, an incredible leader for this club. I think that all parties are going to be, happy with the decision moving forward. But yeah, look, I'm probably not in the camp of blaming solely Isaac Moses as much as some people are, perhaps as much as I was a couple months ago. So I think definitely both parties are at fault, and I think both parties can take a lot and learn from this situation.
100%, mate. Let's get into the last little update here regarding a Broncos star who obviously wants to be at the Broncos, but it might not end up that way.
Absolutely, man. So Corey Paix, current Broncos hooker and lifelong Bronco, has essentially come out and said he wants to be a Bronco for life. He wants to remain at this club for the rest of his NRL career. And if while he hasn't had a superstar season, for those who have watched him, definitely know that he is an NRL quality hooker and he will have a long career in the NRL. However, Corey Pace may not actually be staying at the Broncos. Now, he's the only hooker in the Broncos top 30 for 2026 not to have a contract moving forward. So um, it's, for someone who's essentially been picked as their starting hooker to start the season, for him not to have a contract moving forward is a little bit worrying for Corey Paix. Now, obviously, they've got a ton of young hookers at the club, but they did put their faith into Paix moving forward. Now, there's been whispers that the Cowboys are interested in potentially bringing him in, and that comes after they ruled out a mid-season move for Reid Marnie. So we could potentially see Corey Paix stay in Queensland but head over to the Cows, which I think would be an awesome move for both parties. But essentially, while he does want to be a Bronco for life, it's looking like salary cap pressures. With all their money tied into Reece Walsh, with Ezra Mann, with Payne Haas. We could be seeing Corey Paix donning new colours from next year and onwards.
It's going to be super interesting to see what happens with Corey Paix because he's a great player. And when he's at his best, he's super crafty. He's got great ruck recognition. His timing's really good. Service is good. Like that first game against the Roosters just really shows you the type of player that Corey Paix can be, and we've seen glimpses of it throughout the year. Yes, his form's been a little bit inconsistent throughout the grand scheme of things for 2025, but he's a great dummy half. He's a great player, and Matt just put the faith in him to be the starting dude. You've still got Blake Moses sitting in reserve grade. You've still got Billy Walters, relegated to a 14 jersey as well, a guy that's been playing starting hooker for the Broncos for the past few years, with other coaches being at the club. Tyson Smoothie's going to the Super League. They've got other guys going to other places. They've put faith in Corey Paix to be that guy for them. Obviously, with Blake Moser, that would be a little bit worrying for them as well. They've got a young kid sitting in reserve grade. He's got a ton of potential. Back end of last year showed that he's ready for first grade. That's a little bit worrying, and Madge would certainly be thinking of that. The Broncos would certainly be thinking about Blake Moser and retaining him, because if he goes to another club, it's a failure by the Brisbane Broncos. He's a generational talent at number 9, and if they were to lose him, it would be a real not a don, but it'd be a real failure for them.
Yeah.
Billy Walters is also 30 years old too. People have got to remember that. He's not a 25-year-old guy. He's 30. So he's, coming to the back end of his career as well, or at least the peak of it. What do you do with him? Is he a part of the plans? I think Corey Paix is 27 too. I don't think he's young. I think that he's been a little bit of a journeyman as well. I could be very wrong about that. I'm going to look it up now.
I believe he's around 25.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what 25, you bang on there.
Yeah.
On Isaac. Perfect. That's gonna be interesting to see what they do with Corey Paix and what they want to do with the hookers moving forward, because it has been a bit of concern for them, hasn't it, mate?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, and as you said, if they lose Moser, like it's a generational fumble from the Broncos. But at the same time, it feels like the Broncos are just managing their cap so poorly in a sense, because you're hearing all these rumors about all these players, starting players potentially leaving the club, and it's really worrying for a club that's not even doing that well at the moment. You know what I mean? I understand if you're the Penrith Panthers, if you're the Melbourne Storm, and you're struggling to keep your players, but if you're not seeing success on the field and you're struggling to keep your players due to salary cap pressures, it points to potentially whoever's managing the cap, whether that's Madge, whether it's a financial advisor, you're not actually putting your resources into the right places. Now, whether it means that for example, you've brought Ben Hunt in to be, your 6 or your 9 or whatever position that, he can kind of fulfill. But you're putting money into these older players when you've got these younger guys who essentially are waiting to get their contracts renewed. And, in a couple years, Adam Reynolds, Ben Hunt, these type of guys are not going to be playing in the NRL anymore. Are you going to be left with, just Reece Walsh or just Payne Haas, who's, also rumored to be leaving the club. If you don't lock up these younger guys, they're going to move to these, whether it's an expansion club, whether it's another club, and you're going to be a bottom feeder once again. You peaked in 2023, and it was an absolutely amazing season, but none of these guys are getting any younger. Reece Walsh is a shell of himself, at least this season. Payne Haas and Paddy Carrigan, obviously at the peak of their powers, but there's no guarantee that they even stay at the club at this rate. So, if you're not going, you need to keep these players, whether they're fringe players, whether they're young superstars. You look at a team like the Panthers, who they lost an Appy Coruscant, kept a Mitch Kenny, and still won premierships. You see a club like the Bulldogs, who are willing to let go of Reid Marnie and keep a guy like Bailey Hayward, who was unknown a couple of years ago. Like these clubs are keeping these younger guys, these fringe guys, and it's paying dividends. So if you keep putting all your eggs into one or two baskets, like, you're going to be left with a side that is unable to compete for premierships and is unable to afford these guys. So I definitely think there needs to be a revamp and a restructuring of how the Broncos manage their cap. And I think that losing a guy like Cory Paix would essentially be somewhat of a disaster for the club moving forward.
Look, I know that it sort of worked out well for them bringing Ben Hunt in, with Ezra Mam obviously being suspended at the start of the season. I do think, though, if I was the Broncos, I probably wouldn't have bought Ben Hunt. I probably would have let him go to another club, whether that be the Dogs or someone else. I just think that, as you said, mate, like, they've got Moser, they've got a few younger guys in there that are keen for spots. Look, there's talk that Renault's going to get re-signed for one more year. His form at the moment hasn't been the best, and it's actually cost them football games as well. You got Kobe Black, a young guy that is ready to be blooded into first grade. He hasn't made his NRL debut yet. He's been at the club for a few years now, still quite relatively young and maybe not ready for first grade yet, but you've still got him there ready to come through, ready to debut. You've got Jock Madden there as well, who can be that, I guess, speed bump until you get to Kobe Black. You got young guys ready to come in, is the main, I guess, centerpiece of this. And when you're putting your faith in a lot of these older heads, while experience is great, you want to develop the young guys, because as you said, mate, otherwise they're just going to leave. They're going to go to other clubs, and then you're going to be left back at square one or even square zero, mate, because there's just going to be no one left. There's going to be absolutely no one left. And that's going to be a really, really sore point for them for the future. If they don't have any of these rookies, like Israel Leota is another one as well. Like, they've got all these outside backs, Dean Mariners in and out of first grade, because they've got a bunch of guys there that put faith in Gurmat Shibasaki to start the year as well. It's definitely going to be an interesting next few years for the Broncos in regards to their salary cap management, because even if they lose Payne Haas, like, that is an absolute failure for the Broncos. And like, they would struggle. They'd honestly struggle without Payne Haas. They'd struggle with that Paddy Carrigan. So locking these guys up and then putting faith in the younger guys, divvying up the cap to some of these other stars is probably the way you'd have to think of looking forward, especially when you've got Reece Walsh, who will probably be worth more with a few origins and things like that under his belt. You've got Reece Walsh, you've got Kobe Black, you've got Blake Moser. Getting these guys ready, getting rid of, unfortunately, guys like Ben Hunt, guys like Anna Reynolds, maybe even a Billy Walters, might be the key to their success long term. And I think you've got to have a long-term holistic approach for the Broncos and their cap management. You do agree?
Yeah, man, absolutely. You've nailed it on the head there, and it's something that the Broncos really need to take a look at. It's almost like they're riding off the coattails of that 2023 season, and as you said, obviously it paid dividends, but it's 2025 now, and the Broncos are nowhere near this, the invincible kind of machine that they were in 2023. They've brought in a new coach. Their skipper is aging. They're bringing in these aging players, and these younger guys are looking to leave. You know what I mean? And so, if I'm the Broncos, I am absolutely taking a look at restructuring the cap, and potentially, making some tough decisions moving forward, because the way that it's looking for the Broncos right now, if they continue going at this rate, they're going to lose Paix, they're going to lose, potentially a Moser. You're going to be stuck with these superstar players and no players around them. It's definitely worrying for the club. So if I am the Broncos, I'm starting to restructure things. I'm probably steering away from winning a premiership in the next year at least, and focusing on retaining these young guys, blooding these young guys. And because another worrying thing for the Broncos is that, a lot of these younger guys who have been pegged to be superstars haven't really kicked off. Guys like Xavier Wilson, Brennan Piakura, like, while they've had their moments, obviously they're not reaching the heights that maybe most kind of peg them to. So, I think there needs to be, there's a lot more work to do than just bringing in superstar players and hoping it sticks. There's a lot more work that needs to be put into this side. So if I am the Broncos, I'm taking a look at all these factors, and I'm potentially making some tough decisions, letting some older guys go, and restructuring my cap, and not only preparing to win a premiership in the next year or two, but preparing to win one over the next 5 to 7 years. So that's what I would be doing if I'm the Broncos right now.
100%, mate. 100%. It'll be really interesting to see how they handle the salary cap over the next few seasons. Isaac, thanks again for hopping on, mate. You've been an absolute legend, and keen to get stuck into some more news next week. Hopefully a little bit more of a louder week next week for NRL news.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, keen to get into it. And, we're on here every Tuesday, so stay tuned. And if you want to, stay up to date with everything that's coming out, just head over to zerotackle.com.au. Otherwise, you can head over to my Instagram, which is IsaacIsa_journalist, where, we release all the latest news up to date on the spot. So, that's it from me. And we'll be back next week with more news.
Subscribe, guys. Get stuck in. See ya.